Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining the Employment and Skills Forum here at Business Insights 2021. My name is Steve Ackroyd. I'm the founder and managing director of the Job Guru and TaylorMade Legal Recruitment. I'll be sharing this forum as well as taking some part in the discussion. I'll just ask the panel to introduce themselves. So if we can go round clockwise on my screen. So if we start with Rosie, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello everyone, my name's Rosie Reynolds and I run a marketing company in Gloucestershire.
Thank you, Rosie. And Sarah?
Hi, my name's Sarah Stilliard. I represent Babington, supporting businesses in the southwest with apprenticeships and training.
Thank you. And next, Nikki, please.
Hello, good morning everyone. I'm Nikki Williams and I'm Head of Skills at Business West. We're a public service contract organisation plus one of the largest chambers of commerce in the region.
Yeah. And last but not least, sorry, Lauren, please.
Hello, I'm Lauren Greening. I'm SEND Enterprise Coordinator at GFirst LEP. I work with special schools and alternative provision schools in Gloucestershire, supporting the careers leaders with careers education programmes.
Lovely. Thanks everybody, and thank you for joining us today, all the members of the panel. I appreciate you giving your time, and thanks Barry and Camille for coming and joining us and taking part. So 58% of the workforce needs new skills to get their jobs done, according to Gartner. Data is showing that the total number of skills required for a single job has been increasing by 10% year over year since 2017. And furthermore, 1 in 3 skills in an average 2017 job posting in IT, finance or sales are already obsolete. So there's emerging skill gaps due to ongoing business disruption, rapidly evolving needs. They've all been accelerated as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this is not new. When I was a child, they were talking about skills gaps in engineering, in manufacturing. So skills gaps have always been here. So we're going to try and discuss today how those skills gaps can be filled and, potentially who's responsible. Is it a responsibility for schools, colleges, or employers or government, or a mix of all of them, potentially how they could maybe work together. So using the panel's expertise, we're going to just have a discussion around this subject. Nikki, as I mentioned, I've been hearing about skills gaps since the 70s, and we're still talking about it now. Why do you think we're still having this conversation?
Oh, good question. I wonder that myself because I've been in this game quite a while too now, about 10 years. And why do I think we're still in this situation? Well, my honest answer actually is that personally, I think that we tend to allow, and this is going to be quite controversial, I think, we've tended to allow education to be shaped by the political agenda. This is what I'm going to say, and it's quite controversial. I think that unfortunately in this country education has become a bit of a political football, and it changes, policies change, funding changes, and in the last 20 years I've been working on one side of supporting and training young people, to the other side of working on policy and strategy. And I see the same programs coming round and round, and not always the same learnings being taken forward from program to program. And there's been a lot of funding cuts. A lot of our training provision is really up against it as well in terms of funding cuts. And also our businesses, obviously even more so now, are really up against it as well. And it's also the difficulty of the resources in both of those areas, both businesses and education, to come together to work strategically to meet those skills gaps. But yeah.
Interesting answer, and I totally understand. It's as a recruiter, I've noticed that in the of late 90s, early 2000s, there was a focus on universities and getting everybody into university, and that was the great political aim.
Yeah.
And now the degree is not so important for employers, and actually it doesn't get you that great job because everybody's got a degree, so that employers are looking for something different. And it's not solving that. Lauren, you're in education, so how do you see that? Do you agree with Nikki that that's a problem?
Yeah, I think now more than ever that there's that focus on getting the academic qualifications, and that is kind of, I think sometimes schools are blinkered that is what they're being assessed on the most. So they're focusing more on those qualifications and the grades rather than the extra fluffy stuff around it, which helps young people with those skills development, and going out there and actually being able to get a job with the qualifications that they have as well. It's all very well having those in the toolbox, but if you can't actually utilize them or understand how they can be used, that's where I think those gaps fall down when they go to interview or a trial or whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, very true. And so Sarah, your apprenticeships and things, do you find that I mean, we've seen the budget and we'll talk about some of that a bit later, but are you finding in apprenticeships that there's the same sort of issue, that they're being treated as a bit of a political issue and that they're changing depending on political whims, or is that something that's actually being treated better nowadays and being more respected?
A combination of things, really. I would agree with Nikki. The feedback from our employers has been that a lot of degrees just aren't relevant anymore. Technology changes, and a lot of graduates aren't work ready, and we're seeing that with equally a lot of graduates applying for apprenticeship roles because the graduate market has dropped off. And feedback from employers is that there's a big investment in graduates that seem to expect a lot but aren't work ready, haven't been taught that employability side of things. With the apprenticeships, I think it's helped the transition to the new apprenticeship standards that were written by leading employers, coming together as a trailblazer group that set criteria to say this is the standard for a digital marketer, for example, and this is what employers need, rather than it being heavily influenced sort of by that government piece. But obviously they are reviewed by the Institute of Apprenticeships, so that there is some interaction there. For us at the moment, the I think positive message around apprenticeships, it can only be seen as positive. It's just making sure that employers are investing in apprenticeships for the right reasons, rather than that perhaps the lure of the financial incentives piece. So it's that balance as well, and how do we make sure that apprenticeships lead to a permanent position and lead to that progression, rather than a bit of a revolving door, which we've seen in the past. But we've been really encouraged to see the increase in apprenticeship uptake, and hopefully that does help address some of those skills gaps that we're seeing. A lot of the issues, I think, really revolve around emerging technologies as well, and digital skills. We're seeing a real demand for that across our adult education budget, short courses. So I think that's not going to go away, and that digital skills is really important for businesses and for job seekers as well.
Yeah. That's good points, and we'll have a bit of a further discussion on that shortly as well. Hopefully talk a bit more about apprenticeships and how they work. Rosie, as an employer and as obviously having been an employee before as well, and been there, what are your thoughts about the skills gap as it's been talked about, and why do you think we're still talking about it, and has it affected you in your recent growth of your business?
I think the skills gap there's always going to be a skills gap, because we're constantly evolving in what is the current market needs, what different emerging sectors as information and information sharing evolves. I think there's always going to be a gap, because there's always going to be something new. For me, as both an employee and an employer, I think that when these new roles, or fairly new roles, appear, often people are expected to do a hell of a lot in one single role. And so that's what I found, especially within marketing, is that employers are wanting one marketing graduate or one marketing person to do all of their content, their social media, their pay-per-click advertising, absolutely everything, whereas actually all of these are individual specialisms. And with the difference between someone who's gone through an apprenticeship to someone who has been at university is much more theoretical, and thinking about the buyer persona and what they're going to be more drawn to, and so it's much more the theory behind marketing has been my experience. So yeah, it's really interesting to see the different. We've hired both people with degrees and both people who have been through apprenticeships, and there is a huge difference in their skills. You've got those more theory based, and then the more practical side.
Yeah, no, good points. And it's interesting. You're saying that employers are they're expecting people to do so much, and as I mentioned earlier about the skills requirements increasing dramatically with each job. So does the panel think that employers have a responsibility themselves to actually really think about, they're saying there's a skills gap. Maybe it's just trying to get people to do too much, and actually they should separate the skills and separate the roles more. Is that something? What's the panel's opinion on that? So you're looking very thoughtful there, Nikki. So
well, now I'm just thinking about because I've the employers that we work with, and particularly with Kickstart at the moment, some of the discussions we're having with businesses and the workforce development planning that we do with other businesses, and I think often one of the there's a whole range of great businesses out there that are offering lots of great opportunities, and just some businesses are better at developing people than others. So what we really advocate is like developing a learning culture within a business, and that's really hard to shift. And I think that a lot of the challenges that often a business expects when they write a JD, or when they're thinking about the person in the role, they think about them actually what they want them to be. Yes. Rather than what they want them to come in as. And I think that's the mistake often, that you write in the JD what you want the person to become rather than what you're recruiting for. So I think businesses need to think more about, like you're saying, like competencies and attitudes, and obviously that qualifications are important, but not being stuck in that mindset of, it has to be a degree, it has to be a 2-1 in English if you're going to do a marketing job. So we have lots of consistently conversations with businesses about, well, look, there's BTECs, there's apprenticeships, there's this, there's that, there's lots of types of training young people could have done, or older people as well, that won't necessarily be that traditional degree, but I think that's comes back to the policy makers, because I think they've just made it so overcomplicated for businesses now, that businesses don't know what a level 9 is in a GCSE now, or a level 4 BTEC, or how that equates or maps across the whole landscape, the education landscape. And I think it's this piecemeal approach that we keep having to education that is the underlying problem, because it's made it really quite a complicated landscape for both learners, parents and carers, and importantly, businesses to understand and, decode.
Yeah. No, it's difficult for them. And does anybody else have an opinion on that as well then, on employers and their responsibility for easing the skills gaps?
I think it's quite easy sometimes for employers to go, well, the education side of things needs to happen in school. They need to train their students up better before they then go out into the workplace. But I think the education comes just as much from the employers offering opportunities to those lower levels in schools. We focus a lot on apprenticeships and post-16 options for young people, and that's where we need to train young people ready for the workplace. But actually, let's look further back than that, year 7, 8, 9. Let's start putting those kind of foundation things in place, different opportunities, projects, employer-led projects young people can undertake in school, and start to know what those skills are, to then develop them through school, so that by the time they get to an apprenticeship or a post-16, whatever it might be, they're in that better position to know kind of what lies ahead, and how to develop their own skills.
No, absolutely. I think, I was talking to somebody who's working for a very large engineering firm, and they were talking about the lack of women in engineering, and for their firm, the even bigger lack of engineering of women coming into engineering at their firm. And they were saying, well, why aren't we getting them there? And he was given the task of looking into it, and he was saying, well, what stage are you starting to talk to these people about coming to work for you? Say, well, when we've got a vacancy. Well, actually, you need to be talking to them when they're 10 years old, or maybe even younger, and saying, hey, this is an opportunity. This is something you can have an ambition to do. Don't wait until they've gone through school and then say, hey, do you want to come and work in engineering? And I think that's, I think employers getting involved in education and going and talking to people early on can really help them to get there. Absolutely. So next I've got a question from Mark Learwood, who's in the audience. He sent this in earlier. And he's asked, do you think that the new modern apprenticeships will become more popular with businesses, especially with the increased incentives and grants available as were announced in the budget this week? And Sarah, obviously this is definitely your bag, and I know Nikki as well, you'll have things to say on this, but I'll start with Sarah. So do you think that they're going to become more popular now?
I certainly hope so, because the apprenticeship landscape's in the best position it's ever been from a funding perspective, particularly for SMEs. There's up to 95% funding towards the training itself, and then you've got these incentive payments to help with some of those initial costs of taking on a new member of staff, helping with that, sometimes the technology, and equally sort of the impact on other individuals in the business. I think really we'll probably see an increase as well in uptake in degree apprenticeships because of the strange way that university education has had to be delivered last academic year and into this next year. We are seeing individuals sort of changing tack where they might have pursued that route and looking for alternatives. So it's really about improving and increasing that information provided to employers through organisations like Business West and Chambers and LEPs and platforms like this to make apprenticeships a little bit more accessible to a variety of different businesses, because there are so many apprenticeships, hundreds of apprenticeships are available. And yes, that can seem a little scary and a little bit complicated. So that's where training providers like myself need to help businesses understand what apprenticeships might be suitable for their business and for their plans for the future, and making sure we don't have these really weird and wonderful complicated job descriptions, that there's really a function that they want the young person to come in and perform, or someone wants to retrain at a later point in their career. It's not just for young people as well. So we really hope that uptake will continue to increase, and it should be a very busy 6 months for us with processing these incentives.
Yeah, I think there's certainly going to be very busy going forward. Nikki, now I think you've got two perspectives on this, because you yourself are doing an apprenticeship, I believe.
How do you know that?
I've been stalking
secret
you.
Squirrel. I am indeed, and it's really hard, I have to say. So I'm a massive advocate of apprenticeships. I came from my background. I'm from Bristol originally, from South Gloucestershire, and my family was not a family of people going to university. So I was the first person in my and the university was free then. But if we are where we are now, I wouldn't be able to go to university. And apprenticeships are just brilliant for offering diverse routes in for young people, opportunities. You learn while you earn. And I always say to young people, it's worth doing a degree, an apprentice, just to see if you actually like the job. Because you can go and spend 30 grand on a course in marketing or film. I mean, I did film, bizarrely, but actually doing that job is very different to studying it. And I think that it's just a really good route through. what's amazing is, I mean, I've been working, I'm also the vice chair of the Southwest Apprenticeship Ambassador Network, which is a great network for businesses that have apprentices. We support the business and the apprentice. But a little plug there. But I think, you know, what is still amazing to me is that how little businesses still understand about apprentices. And I don't think it's their fault, because there's so many good people in the region, like Sarah, like the training provider networks, like ourselves, like the colleges and the universities are doing so much to promote apprenticeships. And there's still a bit of a gap, a huge gap actually, I think, in the knowledge of apprenticeships with businesses. You know, there's still a lot of myths around it. You know, businesses still don't realise that you can train a member of your staff on an apprentice, that you know, the apprenticeships are for people of all ages now. Like Sarah was saying, there's hundreds and hundreds of standards out there now that are all developed in hand with businesses. But we've still got such a long way to go to getting that out to businesses and getting them, and there's been a huge drop, hasn't there, Sarah, in the younger age groups and the lower levels, 16 to 18 year olds. There's been a huge drop in the region in uptake on those. So that's something to do with this policy again, but but also, you know, there's just been a lot of emphasis on the higher levels because of the levy. So a lot of businesses have been using their levy to train business staff in their businesses. So there's been a drop off on bringing the entry level in. So that's where we need to really focus. Yeah, and I'm doing my level 7 in leadership and management at UE, and it's great. I'm really enjoying it. It's hard work, and you know, I think that I've had lots of apprentices in my business, and it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, if you get a candidate who can, you know, take someone to do an apprenticeship and work at the same time, they're amazing, and also much more likely to stay in your business long term, because you can shape them. You know, they become committed to the company, you're investing in them, and so they, you know, there's off the top of my head I can't remember, but there's great stats out there about how many people go on to become managers and senior leaders in the businesses where they started as apprentices.
Yes, I'm sure that they're pretty good, because if you show that commitment, if a business shows that commitment to somebody and trains them through, they're going to, you know, want to stay.
Yeah.
Rosie, I'll bring you in on this, because, you know, we were talking the other day about marketing, and, you know, there's a lot of good apprentices coming out of marketing, and, you know, you've got a mix in your business of people who've done degrees, I think, and done apprenticeships and learned. What do you know about apprenticeships yourself? You know, and how do you find people who've come out of apprenticeships, and would you consider apprenticeships in your business?
I think following on from this conversation, it's definitely something we would look at now. It's not something that I've considered in the past, because I've just thought, oh, I don't actually have the time to bring on an apprenticeship into our business, and actually that's probably something that I need to look at now and consider. We have employed some excellent people who've come through from apprenticeships, and I did go about finding them through you, Steve, so little plug for you there.
Thank you.
But yeah, with marketing, it's constant change. So for me, actually apprenticeships on the job training is actually preferable, because it's moving so quickly. As I said, university degree is more about the theory behind it, what we're trying to achieve, and getting into the mindset of the buyer. Whereas actually a lot of the time, you can pick that up as you go, best practices, and my experience of people coming out with a marketing degree don't actually know how to do some very simple marketing tasks. For example, setting up an email campaign. They don't know how to use the actual tools to implement the theory that they've learned through university.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, they've got so they've learned all the theory, as you say, but that practical experience, and that's where work experience is really valuable. I mean, Lauren, do you have anything to to add to that question about, you know, modern apprenticeships becoming more popular? I know it's not your sector.
No, yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about, you know, the diversity of employers taking on apprentices and that kind of thing, but I think it's also worth mentioning the diversity of the young people or the apprentices that they're taking on as well. Very much my bag is about special educational needs and taking on, you know, those young people with higher needs as well. And although it might take them longer to learn a skill, if you look at young people with learning disabilities in the workplace, they are more loyal to the business in the long run. They stay with that company for a longer time. So it's about investing in those young people right at the start. There's funding out there for job coaches through access to work funding. So it's things like that. If employers don't know that that's there and they can access it, that's why I think a lot of that pool of young people with the higher needs are often left behind, and that's why such a small percentage of them aren't in work at all, because they can't access or don't know how to access it. And I think often that is because employers, not because they don't want to necessarily, it's that they don't necessarily know how to. So I think it's down to us to help train them to open the doors and understand what young people can do, not what they can't do.
Yeah, well, you just led me on to a question I was going to ask you. Very, very, very neat, Lauren. Perfect. So yes, because as you say, there is a distinct lack of opportunities for SEND students moving into workplace. I think the statistics are 85% want to go into normal full-time employment after school, after education, but only 15% actually achieve that. And Camille Mortimer, who's in the audience, she did ask, what are the biggest barriers employers are facing in regards to providing employment or work placement opportunities for a young person or adult with a disability? You know, whether it's physical health, learning difficulties, neurological or mental health. And how does the panel think that those difficulties, those barriers can be overcome? So start with Lauren, obviously. So yeah.
I think a lot of it is fear of the unknown, and I totally get that. You know, if you don't know how to talk to a young person with a learning disability, or you've never had the experience of working with someone with a learning disability, you might go, well, I don't know how. And actually the reasonable adjustments that a company needs to make to accommodate those needs are often very cheap or actually very easy to do. It just takes the time to plan it and implement it. I also think it's important for schools to reach out to their local employers as well and ask. And if a company says no to providing work experience, shadowing, workshops, whatever it might be, not just leaving it there, and the schools actually offering an element of training as well. Those schools work with young people with SEND all the time. That's part of their job role, and actually they're in the best position to help train the employees to understand more about how someone with kind of neurodiverse young people work. What is the benefits? How do they operate? What is the best thing to do to get the best out of those young people? In the same way, you know, those who don't have learning difficulties, you know, we all have weaknesses. We all have areas that we're not brilliant at. It's the same for young people with learning disabilities. It's just they've got a label attached.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, really good point at the end there about the labelling. Sarah, I'm interested with the with Babington, with the apprenticeships you do. Do you have many SEND people taking part? Do you have employers potentially putting up barriers if a candidate for an apprenticeship does have a special educational need?
I think this is sort of some key areas to think about there. I've seen a lot of neurodiverse applicants, particularly to IT apprenticeships. We've seen that they really thrive in those sorts of environments, in those technical settings where some might find it quite difficult working individually and on their own, whereas they really set their mind to a task, and we've seen them really thrive. Or I've also been supporting in the past the Royal National College for the Blind, just over the border in Herefordshire, with apprentices, with apprenticeships for previous students and existing students, and access to apprenticeships. And there's a lot of work going on locally through with employers for improving technology to support those people into those roles, because technology can play a big part in improving accessibility. And then equally from a training provider, we can draw down additional funding to support those with additional learning needs, which means that we as the training provider can help that employer and that apprentice to have that more dedicated support and help them progress on the apprenticeship. So really there's lots of support available. If we're seeing sort of barriers from the employers and saying, I'm not sure we could support someone, it's for us to ask, well, what would you need to put in place to be able to support them, and ask that, and equally ask that of the candidates as well. What would you need from an employer? And it's about setting those expectations, I think, early, and trying to answer some of those concerns, because apprenticeships should be accessible to all in the same way that education is in a more formal setting, and it's about providing those work experience placements again as well, and really dedicated careers advice back into the schools, which we're seeing with the Careers and Enterprise Company. We're seeing that start to improve, and really it's about engaging employers really with the disability confidence scheme as well, which is a key criteria when advertising apprenticeships on the National Apprenticeship Service. We can specify whether or not the employer is taking part in that initiative. So I think there's lots of different ways we can tackle it. It's just really about trying to understand the needs of the employers and the needs of those individuals, and trying to join the two up really. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, great answers. Thank you. And it's interesting. So the reason, as an enterprise advisor, I chose to work with SEND schools, or one of the reasons, was because I had no knowledge of special educational needs and who the people were in school with these needs and where they're going. And my niece has just recently been diagnosed as autistic after many years of her mum fighting for a diagnosis. And I realised I know nothing about it, and not seeing, I know one person I've worked with who, in the company we worked with, the company made allowances, and she had a day every week where she could work from home, so she wasn't overwhelmed by being surrounded by people all the time, and they made those allowances for it. So, well, I don't know anything about this, and as a recruiter and as a business owner, I should know, and I should be supporting the workplace. Rosie, I'm going to come to you on this and say, how do you feel about the information you get given? Do you have any information about, special educational needs and how people could work in your business and how you could support that? Or is that, as it was for me, and I think as Sarah and Lauren have mentioned, it's a closed book to you?
Yeah, I think, well, I have very little knowledge about it, and I'm not sure whether that's because I am a young business. We're just almost 2 years old. So yeah, I'm not sure whether it's because of that reason I've been so focused on growing the business that actually we haven't explored these options. But I haven't received very much information about it, and I think if I had, I would feel that it was much more of a responsibility of the business owners and local businesses to actually reach out and take part in this, and really help young people into jobs, because it's there's a huge gap there.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts, Nikki, about, you obviously work with a lot of different businesses, in your role, and, do you think that we should be promoting, or, as Rosie said, the alternative, access to skills? So, people from a SEND background, we discussed earlier about apprenticeships aren't known well enough about. Should we be doing more promotion somehow?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. Like the panelists were saying, it's twofold. It's one is about raising awareness, and then the additional support that might be needed. So it's just, there is, because with apprenticeships there is additional funding, and there is funding that training providers can access as well for support in some cases, additional support for the employer. I think a lot of it is about confidence, really, as well, in terms of the employer side of things, because like you were saying earlier, you know, you just might need to make a really few small adjustments within your business, and I think that just really comes down to confidence in the business, and that's where they need the help, where they might need the help and support to be more open-minded, I would say, and create more inclusive working cultures and environments, because there is a lot of support out there actually, but it's not, I don't think it's easily accessible to businesses.
Yeah, got to search for it and got to know
You've
that
got to
you
really
want
search
to
for it,
find
yeah.
it. Yeah.
So you have to really want to do it to, you know, which is not, you know, the best starting point.
No. And if you don't know, you know, like Rosie and myself, if you don't know what the benefits are, and you're not going to look for it, you're always going to go along the route of least resistance. Really, you're going to go through what you know, aren't you? Lauren, you know, with you know, with you, we try to get work placements, or the idea is to get work placements so employers actually, so the students get the work experience, but also it helps the employers to get the experience of working with these students. But what do you think are the benefits, Lauren, for an employer to take on somebody with a SEND background? Sarah mentioned something that's often come about, and I've had employers who there's a building in Cheltenham here that nobody's allowed into, that one of their roles, they specifically wanted people who were neurodiverse because they could focus on specific tasks. So I had to, that was an interesting recruitment process, that was. But apart from that, what other benefits do you think there are for employers to take on people from a SEND background?
Well, I mentioned it before, actually. Young people with additional needs generally are more loyal to a company. They'll stay there for the long haul because they feel valued, and, you know, for them, they have to go through so many more hoops and hurdles in order to get that job, that it's a bit more when they get it, because of all those barriers that they've had to go through. I also think, you know, we know that a good workforce is diverse, and sometimes it's difficult for employers to only see diverse in kind of their own kind of range. Actually, diverse is the whole hog, and therefore it is more important for the value of the company, and what they're going to produce, or whatever that the company is, will be more worthwhile if they do invest in young people. And then you touched upon work experience as well. I think that helps employers dip their toe in the water of SEND. They'll have the school's support in terms of, you know, pen profiles or whatever it might be, in order to have that young person on board with them. And that will help understand what a young person with SEND needs, wants, and how they can operate. Obviously, the whole world of SEND is so broad, but actually allowing, even if it's only a couple of days of work experience for that young person, that would be massive. And to help that young person's kind of eyes widen to the world of work, and the fact that work is accessible and they could go on to get it, is really good, and also helps the employer to understand a little bit more about what they don't know. I say, you don't know what you don't know. It's only when you kind of unlock that door and go, oh, this is a whole world that is unknown to me, and it's really worthwhile for them as a business.
No, absolutely, and it's a very good point you make about there's a lot of talk about diversity in employment, but yes, we do tend to think about our own ranges. So it's, you know, whether it's more women in the boardroom, whether we're ethnic diversity in the workforce, but there's much less focus on actual diversity in other ways, educational diversity, etc., in a lot of ways. So I think, as you say, the work experience can help move that. I'm going to move this on slightly, and actually I wanted to talk to Rosie about her specific experiences. Rosie, I think, mentioned earlier, Rosie hasn't been in marketing all her life. That's not what she went from school to doing. She actually changed careers through. So Rosie, I'm very interested in what your experience was of when you were learning new skills, how you were supported in learning those new skills, and who provided that support for you in your transition into marketing. Perhaps you'd tell everybody where you started from first. And then...
Yeah, I think just to put it out there, I think I'm going to be a really awful example actually. But I went to university and studied theatre, which is an interesting degree in itself. Thankfully, I'm going to pull out the transferable skills. There are a lot of transferable skills. So we were taught about how to run a theatre business, how to apply for funding grants, and then the acting side as well. So I came out with some really good skills, and I would I recommend it? I probably would recommend it because it's such a varied thing. It just included so much. So I came out of that and went into your standard jobs where people went, oh, you've got a degree with jazz hands, excellent, that's useless. So there was no understanding of what I'd actually done from an employer perspective. So I actually went into some really strange jobs, such as forensic science. I knew nothing to do with my degree. And then I started up a franchise. So I ran a drama academy for children and adults who were looking to build their confidence rather than looking to become performers on stage. And this also involved young children and adults with learning disabilities as well. So from that, I was running my own business. Had been taught how to run a business through university and had done that, although it's wholly different in real life. And the main part of running any business is actually the marketing and the sales. So every business, in essence, is a marketing and sales business because you've got to sell that product in order to be able to do the thing that you want to do. So I was actually self-taught in marketing because I came into it at a point where social media, digital marketing was actually growing and there wasn't very much available about it. So, so my marketing skill set and my business growth skill set actually came from me working within a company, making those mistakes, within my own company, making those mistakes. And the learnings there and doing short courses through Google and Facebook, and it was very much self-led. And then I actually sold the drama academy and moved on after a few years and started working in various different, very strange industries compared to where I'd come from. So PVC windows and then investment banking. Before setting up Rosie Reynolds Marketing, and what I was looking for in those companies really was that ability to change the perception slightly of those companies. So with UPVC windows, we looked at how that can become more green and sustainable. I am going off on a tangent, so stop me if I just completely go off on a story, Steve.
Yeah.
But I think for me, because of that journey that I made into, running marketing departments in different companies, building up my own business, it's something not every business owner is able to look at that. And so this is why we developed the marketing company, was to be their marketing department rather than them trying to do it themselves.
Yeah, so can I just take you back a bit, because you talk about the companies that you worked with where you were learning your marketing. How did they support you in that, or did they just say come in and go at it?
I think that most of my learning was done, although you're constantly learning on the job when things are changing, most of my learning was done within my own company. So when I actually started with the other companies that I worked with afterwards, I had that skill set there, and was able to come with that. And that's where the expectation of what people can do. I was lucky in that I was running my own business and had to do absolutely every area of marketing. And And so I had that skill set, whereas actually if they'd brought someone in that hadn't done that, their experience of the whole board might have been less.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, just it makes me think of an interesting question that for Sarah and Nikki on that. Actually, with the fact that Rosie was running her own business, you know, the drama school, theatre school, and she was having to learn marketing and these things. As a business owner, can you put yourself on an apprenticeship? Is that an accessible route?
It's a difficult one because you need to have a dedicated mentor. So where we've seen sort of really small businesses or one-man bands, they really struggle to access apprenticeships because they can't mentor themselves to do that. But, you know, in slightly larger organisations, we do see senior members of staff doing apprenticeship funded training. Equally, those that might have been in an industry for a long time, whether that be marketing or IT, that want to formalise that knowledge by gaining the qualification. So really varies. Sometimes it can be a bit tricky because the funding rules are quite strict. But you know, we are trying to increase uptake across the board with apprenticeships as a way of accessing that training that might not have been open to them earlier in their career, and give them that opportunity to sort of I guess have that validation a little bit, and access it that way. So not really answer the question potentially, but no, it really depends on the circumstances, but wherever possible we'll try and find a solution, but it's got to be viable. Apprenticeships aren't designed to be self-guided study, and that's the difference. That's the real benefit of them, is that rather than kind of trying to go away and learn something on your own and trying to sort of apply it, it's having that support. But equally it sometimes can be a little bit more limiting, because we do need you to be learning from someone or having support from someone within the organisation, because as an apprentice you can't do it all on your own at all.
No, although as a business owner you generally are trying to do that, as Rosie quite well explained.
But I think it's a good, I think it's the good point you're raising, and this is something that, you know, we've come across again and again, is that access for businesses to, you know, and I'm working on something at the moment, is access for businesses to those sort of basic, sort of like you say, skills that you need to run a business, that are sort of short, accessible, you know, not cost effective, that can be, you know, kind of fitted into your, you know, busy schedule. And we've discussed this quite a few times and again, because a lot of these initiatives as well are very short term again. So, you know, you might have like a startup program or a early business support program that's funded by BAYS or Innovate UK or ESF or something, but it's always very you know, for a short period of time. So I think that's, you know, that's one challenge, is about how it's funded, you know, and then how accessible it is to the business. So it's that those sort of bite-sized ways of delivering courses that's really necessary. And we've had, you know, at Business West, we've had quite a few conversations with training providers about how to do that. And it's a really tricky one. It's one that I don't think is fully resolved in this region, at least, you know, because we're having that sort of consistent access to those sorts of skills. I mean, I'm sort of finding it at the moment, my advisors are out chatting to businesses, and because of COVID and many businesses having to pivot their business models, you know, suddenly businesses having to deal with new CRM systems, you know, with new ways of, you know, delivering their services in, you know, online. And the staff aren't trained for that. They don't know which programs they should be choosing, what solutions are there. And so that's a very immediate need that, you know, one very immediate need that I can think of right now that could really do some injection of cash to help those businesses to turn their businesses around into a different model.
Absolutely. There's you know, that word that's sort of being bandied about everywhere is that pivoting as well. So many businesses pivoting and needing to bring in new skills to help that, and need sometimes funding to help change that direction, which actually there was a question from Barry. I'm conscious we're sort of 5 minutes from the end, so I'll move it along, but this is on the similar to where we've been talking, because Barry, he said, employers are complain that they struggle to recruit candidates with the skills they want. He said, what skills are they talking about? And I thought it'd be interesting for the panel. What skills do you think it is? What are you hearing from your clients or yourselves, that the skills that are needed at the moment, and how is that changing? Going back to, as you were saying, Nikki, how is that changing, and how is education, how is training changing maybe to fill those skills? So just quickly to finish off, we'll start, Sarah.
I think the main skills that we're seeing a need for is at the very basic level, it's employability skills, teaching them what's expected from them in the workplace, sometimes which hasn't quite been covered during their school education. Digital skills, obviously at the moment, are really important, both with new recruits, but also those who might already be in the business that aren't up to speed with certain technologies or having to use something for the first time. I mean, think of how many people had to use Teams for the first time this year, and we'd never used it, and now I probably couldn't do my job without Teams. So it's those sorts of areas really, where often that, as Nikki was saying, that bite-sized learning really helps, just to sort of give them that leg up and enable them to do the good old pivot, as you mentioned, Steve. So those are really what we're seeing a demand in at the moment, is those digital skills, which is why the government's investing so heavily in digital skills boot camps, for example, that are going to be coming in to try and address that. And equally, again, you've got that accessibility piece as well. How are you going to remotely teach digital skills if they've not got access to the technology as well? So those are the main areas that we're seeing demand in at the moment, in those tech and digital spaces.
Can I just touch upon a point that you said there, Sarah? I used to work in a college teaching employability skills, and when they turn up late or whatever, you link it into a workplace and that kind of thing, and they go, yeah, Lauren, yeah, whatever. And sometimes it's only until an employer comes in and goes, oh yeah, that would go down on your record if you were late, or if you were regularly late, or whatever it might be, that they went, oh, Lauren was telling the truth, kind of thing. So sometimes it's the education providers may well be doing that, but actually it needs the oomph of employers to reinforce what the educators are saying, for the students to go, okay, yeah, I do need to listen to this.
That's a really good point, Lauren. And actually, Nikki, that can lead really interestingly onto Kickstart scheme and potentially traineeships as well, because of course a key factor in the Kickstart scheme and traineeships is that employability training.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's the challenge isn't it, is creating a consistent approach as well. And like, and I think that with Kickstart, there is an opportunity there, and the businesses have to, provide some kind of employability training. But a lot of the gateways that I know of, and including ourselves, are bringing in specialist partners to do that employability part. Because it's really important, isn't it? It's really it's really important that it's done right. And the expectations of the candidates are managed, etc. So and of the businesses. So it is I mean, I think Kickstart is once it gets going, it will be a great opportunity, but it's not the only answer, is it? And so we have to find I think a more sort of cohesive approach across the board. And I think, some of the stuff around traineeships and, and T-levels could do that. But I think it's going to have to, it'd be changing, some of the policies around those traineeships and how they're accessed and utilised as well.
Yeah, I think it was you who mentioned earlier, actually, Nikki, about the confusion for businesses. There's so much. How do we know where to go? And, I work, I working with a lot of businesses on providing the training for the employability training as part of the Kickstart scheme, because a lot of employers themselves, they don't have those skills. They come into business and they do what they do. You're not trained how to do that. But the Kickstart scheme was launched, and it's like, right, you have to provide this training.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies have spoken to these small companies. Well, how do I provide this training?
Yeah.
And I don't. And a bit like Rosie mentioned earlier about apprenticeships and having that time to spend with an apprentice. They're then thinking, well, there's that time to spend with a Kickstart employee or a trainee. So I think letting employees, having a joined up approach and enabling employees to understand what their options are and the support they're going to get is really key to that. I mean, what skills do you find, Rosie? What's your thoughts?
Well, I was just, if I can just add on to the end of what you were just saying as well. I think it's really important to remember that companies are at a point of stress at the moment as well. A lot of them are going through this real squeeze and drain on resources, and often it is that thing of, well, that's another thing that has to do. At the moment, we're trying really hard to keep our this is, another business. We're trying really hard to keep our heads above the water at the moment. How is adding more stress and more complexity to our staff and training going to help me through this? And I think there's been so much in the media and the news over the years about diversity in the workplace, but it has been focused on women and ethnic groups over and disabilities as well over SEN and young people. I think there's been a lot more noise around the other groups than there has around this.
Yeah, that's a good point, and a good, as we talked earlier, yes, there's a lot of focus in other directions quite often. So we've come to the end of our time, but just quickly, if I could just go around the panel and just give you all sort of 15-20 seconds each just to wrap up and your thoughts after this, because I think this is a discussion we could have going on for a week rather than just an hour. But if you just want to wrap things up and your thoughts on our discussion today, I'll start with Lauren.
Yes, obviously I very much work in the world of education, which links into the world of employment. I think for me, it's something that I knew before, and I think I need to focus on again, is about that careers education is not just about education for young people, it's about education for employers as well, and how we do that. You can put events and things like that on and you'll always get the same companies attending those events. It's tapping into that group of employees, which would be brilliant at supporting young people or young people with special educational needs, whatever it might be, but it's how do we tap into those businesses. So again, not something that we can just solve just like that, but it's for me, that's food for thought.
Yeah,
thank you.
Nikki, what's your wrapping up?
I think that there is it is complicated out there, and we are in a difficult position at the moment for businesses, but I think there's a lot of positives actually that have, trying to look positive and ahead. I think there are lots of positives that have come out of the pandemic in some ways, in terms of the way we work, the way that it's made work more accessible. It's not great for everybody in terms of, that work-life balance, but there are some, I think if digital accessibility is really key here. So I think we really need to get a grasp on that, about how, ensuring that there's access to all to digital, and then that way, because there's lots of great initiatives out there, there's lots of great learning platforms, but I think one of the problems is the accessibility for the learners as well. And like Lauren said, it's recognizing that there's an education piece to do on both sides, that there's lots of very willing businesses out there, but they need hand holding, they need a bit of confidence and capacity building to be able to do it. And the businesses that we've worked with, that we've done that with, we've seen amazing results, and they go on to do it themselves, which is what we want, because we don't actually really want to be doing, we want to step away, don't we, and be able to let businesses get on with this. But I think it's quite, we've been talking about digital skill shortages for at least 12 years that I've been, you know, in this game. And it's you know, so we need to stop talking, don't we, and start doing something about it.
No, good point. And Sarah, what's your final thoughts?
I think for me, really, again, it's just that availability of information to employers and just trying to make that more accessible and a little bit more in layman's terms. And I think, as Nikki was saying, the importance of having a learning culture. It's not just for the big businesses that need to implement that, you know, across the board. If I think employers feel more valued and secure if they feel that their employer is investing in them and in their ability, and there's always something new to learn. That's why we're always talking about these skills gaps, because there's always this emerging technology. But what's important for your business, and how can apprenticeships or traineeships or Kickstart support that? Because unless business owners can see a real benefit, an ROI, there's not many of them that can do it out of the kindness of their heart. So it's about trying to explain the real benefits that are out there for taking on an apprentice, taking on someone with slightly more diverse needs, and really trying to change the way in which some businesses operate, really. But it is tough. It's a hard sell sometimes in terms of you know, the other considerations and all of the stresses that are going on at the moment. But hopefully there's some light at the end of the tunnel. You know, I'm seeing apprentices return to face-to-face interviews rather than Zoom interviews, you know, and getting back into an office environment. So I think we can't really replicate that organic learning, and really looking forward to seeing that sort of continue, and more businesses engage with it in that way.
Fantastic. Yes, it's nice to hear that getting back to some sort of normality is appearing. Rosie, I'll leave the final sort of word to you to wrap up, and what your thoughts are at the end of this discussion.
Yeah, I think it is a responsibility that businesses need to take on, and that ongoing learning and continued development is something that we do. We put, you know, 4 hours a week in everybody's diaries and to do that training, but it's not adopted by lots of businesses, and we've been able to do that because we're a new business that has been able to set our own policies and our own ideas and ethics behind how we work. But it is, for me, it would be great to see this being spoken about more often and more information out there that I think, as Sarah said, is easily digestible for businesses, and shows what the benefits are as well, and not just monetary benefits, because we do have a responsibility as employers to be creating opportunities for everybody.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a good way to end. So thank you to all the panel for taking part. It's been a really interesting discussion. I think I could have kept talking with you all for a lot longer, and many more questions that we could discuss, but really appreciate you taking part, and thank you very much for your insights and your thoughts, and thank you to the audience for joining us live here. Being very grateful for your questions and your input to the show as well. So I hope everybody has a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Steve. Cheers. Bye.